You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters.
The Qua.
To fully understand who the Rakata were, one must first learn about their spiritual progenitors. Long before the days of the Jedi or the Sith, when no galactic republic existed, there stood among the stars a galaxy-spanning people who were called the Qua. These blue-skinned, 3-meter-tall bipedal reptilians were a peaceful and benevolent society, a rarity indeed among spacefaring species. They hailed from the planet of Dathomir, millennia prior to the Dathomirians being the planet's dominant peoples. The Qua were born with innate telepathy, and this was often their most common mode of communication. They also had a natural ability to wield the Force. They occupied the outer rim of the galaxy in a region that was called Qua Holdings at the time of their empire. The Qua were able to spread their civilization through the use of a device called an Infinity Gate. Infinity Gates were a rapid teleportation technology that, when activated, could transport any user or object instantly from point A to B. With each new Infinity Gate that was built, the network of gates made it easier to establish a presence on distant planets. During this ancient time, it was common to make technologies that could only be powered by the Force, or the power of the cosmos as the Qua referred to it. Infinity Gates were no exception. It could only be activated via the Force. The Qua themselves were primarily interested in exploration, technological advancement, and philosophical enlightenment. They encountered many species in their journeys, attempted to make contact with them, and share with them the power of the cosmos. This, however, would ultimately lead to their decline and downfall. It was on a fateful day when they encountered the highly Force adept, yet primeval species called the Rakata on the planet of Lihan. It was the Rakata who would eventually learn the secrets of the Force and technology from the Qua, and through brute strength and violence, would ultimately displace the Qua as a galactic hegemon. After the Qua's decline, they retreated back to their homeworld of Dathomir, and would eventually devolve into a primitive people known called the Qui.
The Infinite Empire. The Rakata were an amphibian-like humanoid species, with cone-shaped heads and extruding eyes. They were a warrior race with a propensity for violence. Some even speculate the reason they remained primitive for so long is because they were constantly in a state of intertribal warfare, and never could enter an industrial age because there were no prolonged eras of peace to be productive and expand their economy. The planet of origin, Lihan, was a tropical, temperate island world, which is possibly the reason why the Rakata had an amphibian physiology, as they most likely evolved from the ocean to the land, becoming a primarily terrestrial species. Lihan would later be called Rakata Prime, and was the capital of the Infinite Empire during its zenith. Like many sentients throughout the galaxy, the Rakata were highly sensitive in the Force, and this is what drew the Qua to seek them out. When the Qua discovered the Rakata, they began a project to teach these primitive peoples the ways of the Force science, and philosophy. Perhaps when the Qua met this unlearned people, they largely ignored their warlike ways, attributing it to their lack of knowledge, hoping that it could be trained out of them. This, however, was not the case. The Rakata's lust for power was insatiable, and they simply viewed their advanced benefactors as a means to an end. Rakata society had many practices which deeply offended the Qua's sensibility, not the least of which was cannibalism and a rapacious desire to wield the dark side of the Force. Before long, indeed when it was too late, the Qua realized the monster which they had unleashed on the galaxy. The once backwards race learned how to harness advanced technologies and become powerful Force users, ultimately displacing the Qua, forcing them to retreat back to Dathomir, whilst destroying their own infinity gates on the way. Now that the gates were destroyed, the Rakata needed a method of travel which would help them fulfill their galactic ambitions. Using concepts from the infinity gates, they developed the first known hyperdrive technology. And like the Qua's instant travel devices, these hyperdrives could only be activated through the use of the Force. This kicked off the dawn of the Infinite Empire. Now armed with a fleet of hyperspace-capable vessels, the Rakata began a long campaign of conquest and subjugation. Lehon was renamed Rakata Prime, and would serve as the home base and capital of the Infinite Empire, becoming a galactic trade hub, not unlike Coruscant in the modern era. The techno-military capabilities of the Empire seemed to have no limits, and its innovations were endless, culminating in the dreaded mobile armament facility, the Star Forge. This superweapon was a scientific marvel and a blight upon the galaxy. It was capable of mass-producing a standing army in a very short period of time, harnessing energy from local stars. The Star Forge, like Rakata hyperdrive tech, was also enchanted with the dark side of the Force. The vessel was designed to be automated, using a form of artificial intelligence, and has even been described as semi-sentient. The combination of intelligence and the dark side had a significant effect on the Rakata who used it, heightening their already cruel and aggressive nature. Much of their technology had built-in self-repair systems, which is why they did not decay and survived to be fully functional for thousands of years, and the Star Forge was no exception.
The Star Forge is more than just a space station. In some ways, it is like a living creature. It hungers, and it can feed on the dark side that is within all of us.
Quote Darth Malak.
With the use of a massive army and the Star Forge, they expanded their empire to over 500 planets during their reign, specifically targeting force-rich worlds to conquer. The Rakata preferred enslaving species who had some force aptitude, and this strategy was twofold. On the one hand, much of their tech required the use of the Force, so non-Force users were of no value. Also, societies who could wield the Force were often much likelier to become powerful and challenge the Empire's hegemony. Keeping them suppressed eliminated this possibility. The Rakata boasted 10 billion warriors and 1 trillion slaves, many of whom hailed from well-known planets today like Coruscant, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, and Tatooine. They were despotic and ruled with an iron fist, exacting merciless revenge on any who opposed them. They eventually even hunted down their Qua forebears, finding them on Dathomir. Still bitter about the destruction of the Infinity Gates, the Rakata hunted the Qua and led them to near extinction. The massacre was so complete, the Qua devolved into the illiterate species known today as the Qui, a shadow of their past selves. The Decline.
Over 10,000 years of dominance and holding the galaxy by its throat, the Infinite Empire would eventually meet an inglorious demise. The beginning of the end was the Rakatan Civil War, a brutal era which lasted nearly 5,000 years. The Empire was no mere acquaintance to the internal strife, as subterfuge, backstabbing, and power plays were common among the elites. This, coupled with their dark side-fueled thirst for power, made the entire society a powder keg. The very fact that they thrived as long as they did is nothing short of a miracle. Along with the political turmoil were widespread revolts from the slave species. Keeping their vassal states in check was a logistical nightmare. The Rakata's inability to unite and their praetors' unwillingness to accept the legitimacy of any single leader led to one assassination after another. Splintering the empire into warring factions, compromise or humility was a complete non-starter. Even the might of the Starforge could no longer hold this shaky alliance of ambitious warlords together. But the final nail in the coffin was not a coup d'etat, nor a slave rebellion. Indeed, it was a mysterious and highly contagious plague that affected only the Rakata. From the records that are available, it is unclear how the disease may or may not have damaged them physically. What is clear, however, is that it severed their connection to the Force. The Rakata had built their entire society, most of their technology in fact, around the use of the Force. To power and activate their weapons and presumably their industries of agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and so forth, they required the Force. In a way, their reliance on the Force was their greatest strength and their own undoing. As soon as it was realized that they could no longer wield it, there were no doubt massive uprisings from the subjugated peoples, toppling the empire with relative ease. No one truly knows how long it took for the final collapse to conclude. Presumably, it was very rapid. One unsubstantiated theory about the Rakatan plague is that it was an engineered bioweapon, perhaps developed by the Celestials, who saw the Infinite Empire's growth as an existential threat to the galaxy. Or maybe it was a rebel vassal state who had unearthed the secrets of Rakatan biology. Whatever the case may be, what is clear is that the disease was swift and complete, quite literally sending them back to the Stone Age.
The Legacy. As the plague made its way through the Rakatan population, they eventually retreated back to their homeworld of Lihon. And, not unlike their progenitors the Qua, they had a social de-evolution, reverting to a primitive, tribal peoples in an ironic event of cosmic justice. Indeed, their reign of terror had left its mark on the galaxy, which would be felt for millennia to come. There was, however, a few hundred years where the galaxy lacked any sort of superpower. The Hutt Empire was the biggest player during this period, but even they were relatively small in comparison, and their reach was fairly limited. But soon enough, there would be a loose alliance of planets and systems who would eventually band together to form the Galactic Republic in the wake of the power vacuum left by the Infinite Empire. Though their dominance had come to an end, their technology would play a pivotal role in a future epoch. The Rakata had left remnants of their culture scattered throughout the stars, and as previously mentioned, much of their technology had the ability to self-repair and was operated by a form of artificial intelligence. Not the least of these were the star maps and the Star Forge. Nearly 20,000 years after the fall of the Infinite Empire, the Galactic Republic had become a stagnant government, stuck in an economic malaise and constantly fighting enemies from within and without. Two such adversaries were the rogue Jedi Knights, Revan and Malak, who had disobeyed the wishes of the Jedi Council and joined the Republic in the fight against the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars. After the war had concluded, Revan and Malak mysteriously disappeared into the unknown region of space, where the Republic had no presence. Years after their disappearance, Revan and Malak re-emerged and had fully surrendered to the dark side of the Force, as well as amassed an unrivaled military hell-bent on toppling the Galactic Republic, igniting the Jedi Civil War. The Republic was caught completely off guard and nearly collapsed in the chaos. It later became apparent that Revan and Malak had found the Rakatan homeworld of Lehon, which still had a substantial population of Rakata occupying the planet. But more importantly than the people they discovered was their now abandoned mobile mass production facility, the Star Forge, fully intact and operational. Within a few short years, the Dark Lords were able to produce an army that could rival the Republic, staging an all-out war against them. Eventually, the Republic was able to gain the upper hand and ultimately destroyed the Star Forge, ending the Jedi Civil War. Not much was understood about the Rakata at the time. They were colloquially referred to as the Builders. What little information was known is that they had built a number of ancient ruins throughout Republic space, and they had enslaved many species in antiquity. It was also conjectured that they had invented hyperspace technology, though some historians dispute this claim. At the conclusion of the Jedi Civil War, and thanks to Revan and Malak, much more was uncovered about the Infinite Empire and the role they played in the trajectory of galactic history, and that they were an integral part of the stories of many species, including the Wookiees, humans, the Manan, the Sith species, and the Twi'leks, among others. It was discovered that the conflict between the Rakata and the Tythonians, called the Force Wars, was ultimately what led to the formation of the Jedi. To this day, the Rakata remain one of the most important topics of study in the discipline of xenoanthropology and planetary archaeology. Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon. So if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Star Wars podcast. This is Christian,
This is Jordan.
and we find ourselves now lounging on the beautiful beaches of Lehon, enjoying the nice sandy beaches, coastal views, ancient temples, and hostile natives.
Indeed. It is now a tourist trap and resort world.
Despite the dark side energies
Yeah,
constantly emanating from the ruins.
Yeah, there's just a few islands you got to steer clear of, but otherwise
You
it's
probably
great.
won't get eaten.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's a beautiful place. Anyway, so today we're discussing the Infinite Empire, the builders, the Rakata, the progenitors, the precursors to the Galactic Republic. First of all, Christian, what's your overall thoughts about the Rakata? What do you think about them?
They, I think, are supposed to represent like a violent conquestial type species, with very few redeeming qualities. There's nothing ever good said about them. They're steeped in dark side energy. They're like cannibalistic. They're ravenous.
Yeah. I know it's true. There's like nothing redeemable. However, I will say that there was some like comic books written about them, and this is just a very brief summary overview of what I understood about them. That there were actually some Rakata who sort of deviated from what the Empire had done, and they actually tried to stop. When the Empire had like finally declined, there was actually a very short window of time where the Rakata tried to reignite their empire.
Okay.
And some Rakata were good guys, I guess, and they stopped it. And
They were like reformists.
yeah, they were like reformed Rakata, and they were like, no, we're not doing that again. Anyways, you guys will have to. The listeners will have to look that up themselves and read about it. Kind of sounds like an interesting story, actually. But they sort of kiboshed a resurgence of the Rakata. In any case, let's just talk about a few things. So, like the Infinity Gates. When the Infinity Gates are first introduced, they're sort of introduced as like a very unique and novel technology. But I think maybe some writers, this is kind of the problem with a lot of Star Wars stuff is like authors always want to go further back and further back in time. And
so someone is explaining someone else's thing all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Infinity Gates allegedly are actually not the first of their types. There's a species called the Gree, and their empire was 100,000 years prior to the Battle of Yavin, and they use this technology called hypergates, and they were essentially like a black hole or a wormhole, and they would send their ships through it, and that's
how they managed interstellar travel.
Yeah, that's how they were able to. And the Gree were sort of like. They weren't a humanoid species. They were, if I remember the pictures correctly, they're almost squid-like. They have like tentacles. So kind of interesting. But the Infinity Gates that the Qua used were sort of a more refined version of that. And again, I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, but just Stargate, if anyone's familiar with this the science fiction property of Stargate. That's basically what an infinity.
They even
gate.
look very similar.
They look exactly the same.
The cool thing about Star Wars sometimes is they like have a little bit of every other sci-fi enmeshed in it. So they're like, oh, this is a cool concept. We're just gonna lift it and insert it.
Yeah. Exactly. And then they sort of like use that the way it was explained in Dawn of the Jedi is like the Rakata sort of, and I don't know if I sorry, let me just backtrack a little bit here. I don't know if I was totally clear, but the Qua, when they were overthrown by the Rakata, they retreated back to Dathomir, and on their way back, they were destroying their Infinity Gates to stop the Rakata from quickly spreading across the galaxy, right? Because if the Rakata could use their gates, then
They have unfettered access.
Yeah, they would have conquered the galaxy in no time, right? So the Qua, like by the time they had realized how dangerous the Rakata were, they were in panic mode and destroying all their Infinity Gates. But in any case, what limited knowledge the Rakata had of these Infinity Gates, they use this like similar technology to develop hyperdrives. I was reading a little bit. It is in a lot of different Star Wars properties. It's sort of it's claimed that the Rakata invented hyperdrive technology, but then other property or other stories actually contradict that information. Yeah. So I would just say people, look it up and decide for yourself if the Rakata in fact did invent hyperdrive technology. Neither here nor there, but just a thought. The other sort of interesting part of the Rakata Infinite Empire and the Qua as well is it does get it is almost more fantasy. We're getting into like space fantasy type of stuff because all the technology, it was either like you had to use the Force in order to use the tech, or it was enchanted by the Force. So it's very fantasy, like, where like weapons and armor is enchanted by magic. Yeah. There is like sort of that element with the Rakata and the Qua, so kind of interesting.
More fantastical.
Yeah. It's not like in the modern era, you don't really need the Force
to operate
operate anything, really. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you could use the Force to augment certain things, right? But it's just not a necessary component of anything in sort of modern era.
I kind of like the contrast between a galaxy that's run on the Force and a galaxy that can kind of survive without the Force. Like almost like a secular galaxy, I guess I could say.
It's true, yeah.
And you can contrast the modern era of Star Wars, whatever era that might be to you, to this ancient mystical time.
Yeah. And I've said this in the past too. I do like how everything from the aesthetic to like the technology, the people who wrote sort of the Dawn of the Jedi era and the Rakata Infinite Empire era, they did try to actually build in more contrast between the two eras so that it wasn't just pretty much interchangeable, like how Knights of the Old Republic is with the modern era.
You couldn't tell Terrace from Coruscant.
Yeah, exactly. Like all the tech seems relatively the same. The droids are the same, like the weapons, whereas in this sort of era, there is a very noticeable difference. Another interesting factoid, which we didn't really get into, was the Sith species, the actual species of the Sith that came from Korriban. And I don't know if anyone knows, but like they weren't always dark side users, and they weren't exclusively dark side users. Many of them were Jedi-y. In fact, many lived on the planet or in the Tythonian system.
We cover them in our Sith episode.
Yeah, in our Sith episodes, we've covered them. But so go back and check out those episodes. But the Rakata actually tried to conquer Korriban, while the Sith they ruled that world. And the Rakata actually lost. They weren't able to conquer. It was one of the few planets they weren't able to subjugate. But the war was it was very brutal and traumatizing, and billions of people died. And it is believed that this is what turned the Sith as a species to the dark side, and ultimately what dawned the religion was through this very brutal war that happened on the planet.
It's almost like the idea that they realize it's a hostile galaxy and only the strongest survive, and that kind of mentality was ingrained in the culture.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in a lot of ways, just the Rakata, I think the Sith religion, if you will, for lack of a better term, is a much more refined and systematic and I don't know, intelligent way of using the dark side than what the Rakata had, because the Rakata were just, to them, it was just only brute force. There was no cunning or conniving or deceit or manipulation. It was just
a hammer.
Yeah, they just ruled through brute force, right? And the Sith that sort of came later were much more refined than that. So, another big moment in the Rakata Infinite Empire was the Eshka War, and this was a species that it was a little earlier on. The Rakata had already become established, but they did have a rival that rivaled them in military might, and they were the species called the Eshka. And the Eshka fought a pretty major war with the Rakata. And it was after the defeat of the Eshka, when the Rakata overcame them, that the Rakata really established themselves as the galactic superpower, right?
Yeah.
This was sort of the war. This was their World War II, if you will. The U.S. became the superpower after World War II. The Eshka War was sort of the
defining moment.
Yeah, it was the defining moment that sort of launched them into the galactic superpower that they became. And from what I understand, it was fairly close, this war. It could have gone either way, but ultimately the Rakata won out, and they nearly sent the Eshka into extinction. They kept a few of them as slaves and
Pets.
Yeah, almost as trophies, to show their might and how they destroyed the Eshka. So
yeah.
Just again, things we didn't get totally into in the scripted portion that I thought were important in their history.
And just to comment on that too is keep in mind for everyone, we're way in the past, pre-Republic, pre-Jedi and Sith. There are these ancient aliens, civilizations that have their holdings. The galaxy's divided up amongst these different groups, the Qua, the Gree, the Infinite Empire, and then they have their own power struggles, and eventually the Infinite Empire becomes, like you said, the hegemon. So
exactly. And there's even species like the Celestials, right?
Predating all of them and their crazy technology. We're in a really alien time of Star Wars.
Totally.
And actually alien time.
Sorry again on the hyperdrive stuff. I think from what I've read is people think that the Celestials actually gave the Rakata hyperdrive technology or helped them develop it or something. And I was reading even the Rakata at one point were the slaves of the Celestials. But I couldn't find any source for that. I just read it on a Wikipedia page. So people can source that. But I thought it was kind of interesting.
I mean, when we're talking about a time lost to the mists.
Yeah, it's true.
History.
Exactly.
Conflicting accounts and information. And is this true?
Which I almost kind of like, because I do I like really ancient, breaking fourth wall here, going into real world. I'm a fan of really ancient history. That's it's very difficult to ascertain what actually happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of historians, like there's sort of a consensus, a quote unquote consensus about what happened, but really it's just their best guess, right? Like it's very difficult to tell what exactly happened. And I'm like fascinated with those eras because it's like it's so mysterious and so like what was going on back then, you know. Like one of my favorite ancient literatures is the Epic of Gilgamesh. I don't know if you've ever read it.
Yeah, actually, I did a course on it in university.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I like love the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think it's in a lot of ways it's like a beautiful story as well. But it's like it feels so human, but at the same time it's so, I have no context or grid for like their gods or their customs or their culture, right? Like and the Sumerian culture, what it was like. And from reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, you can kind of use your imagination maybe a little bit to sort of imagine perhaps what it might have been like, but no one really knows, you know. It's all just guesswork in a lot of ways. So
yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh and its ties to Star Wars and the mythological,
right?
And like you know, the Hero of a Thousand Faces and all that stuff as being the proto story, right? So
yeah. I know
everything's come full circle.
Yeah, the Epic. I know, like Joseph Campbell sort of believes that the Epic of Gilgamesh is sort of a template of the hero's journey. Yeah, I know you have.
I have my Go listen to our episode on that.
Yeah, go listen to our episode on
the full.
On the hero's journey. But in any case, sorry. I think it's sort of fascinating. I hope in some ways I hope they keep this era of Star Wars like. They should almost write this is just my, like, if anyone from Star Wars or Disney is listening to me, my suggestion is like write small like novellas or something like the Epic of Gilgamesh for the Star Wars history, but make it like super mysterious and hard, and even make like some contradictory
statements on purpose.
Yeah, on purpose, right? Because that's actually how history is. There's like, you can read two tablets from the same era, but if they're from two different locations, they like completely contradict each other, right? And that's kind of how history is. I think that'd be cool to keep it somewhat ambiguous, you know, and difficult.
Mysterious.
Yeah, exactly. Keep the shroud of mystery. Christian, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts. There's a lot of amphibian like creatures in the Star Wars galaxy. There's obviously, and the Rakata are no exception. Sort of reptilian amphibian, I guess. But there's also the Selkath, which is a species they enslaved. The Mon Calamari, the Gungans, the Aqualish, the Nautilins, etc. What's your feelings about like amphibian species in Star Wars? There seems to be like,
I hate them. I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding.
There seems to be like a lot of them though, like more than I kind of didn't think about it, but after doing this episode, I was like, oh, there's actually like quite a few. Do you think it's just a trope, or do you think?
I think, like everything else, like you have mammalian species, you have human-looking, like very human-looking species that you can almost not tell a difference. Minor one or two big features like blue skin, red eyes, kind of thing, right? Yeah. So I think it's just one of the Star Wars templates for species, and there's just so many in the universe that, like, I haven't done a head count of each type of species, so I wouldn't be able to say they are significantly proportional. Just like if you look at any kind of animal species, you know. We'll model this one after birds. We'll model these ones after dinosaurs, right? It's just people using real world references. Yeah.
I know there's like apes too, like the Wookiees and the, that one, I can't remember the name of this. We did an episode on it in our Patreon episode. It was when we reviewed the first book ever written by Alan Dean Foster.
I don't know if I was on that episode.
Oh, maybe Sam did it with me. Yeah. But there's a species that was like very Wookiee-like.
But weren't Wookiees. And you have Ewoks that are a lot like Wookiees. Yeah. So again, like you could start to see those patterns. And I think that's just the limitations of the human mind.
Right, yeah.
That's why a lot of aliens also just happen to feature two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And, you know.
Or they just represent like real species that we know of today.
Right,
know.
Which I'm not opposed to. One, it's easy to do one with makeup and like practical effects.
Yeah.
That's why Star Trek, same issue.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah,
other
you
one-
have like the bug species, and then
I'm not saying that there isn't diversity in that regard, and there's some weird alien species that like we have no frame of reference for, and almost seem like mind bending when you get to know about them.
yeah,
And again, like I appreciate both versions. I like something grounded that you can feel like a character and you can sympathize, because that's
Sure.
another factor too, right? If you have an alien that's so alien that you can't relate, it's hard to tell a story, right? Unless that's the point of the story, is how alien aliens are, right?
yeah. That's always been my sort of assumption, is that like if we ever encountered aliens in the real world,
Yeah.
I don't think it would be very difficult to have a grid for what they are. They'd be so alien to us. That,
There's even some theories that talk about like non-carbon based life.
Right.
Which would be so crazy. Like they'd be like rock-like or
Yeah.
any other material, or a plasma-like being, right? Maybe
Right,
plasma or some kind of energy. So yeah, the options could be limitless, but also there's a counter theory that like if evolutionary principles hold true across the entire universe, then like there might be a preferred way that life tends towards.
yes,
And that's why a lot
like
of
sentient
species,
life.
yeah, exactly. Why a lot of species can have those relational things. Like a lot of animals actually, and that would come from the whole having a descendant species of a mouth and eyes, two eyes and a nose.
Right.
Obviously, you have exceptions, but the vast majority are one way.
Yeah.
And then that theory would hold that like, okay, well, on an alien world with similar factors, you might come up with something that looks similar. And I actually read an article recently. We're totally going off script here for a minute, but
Do it.
I read an article recently that I believe they've run a bunch of experiments, and I guess either the crab is like the form that life tends towards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly how the article kind of played out, but it was like a crustacean seems to be like optimized for survival in like the broadest areas. But yeah, going back to the whole topic of like what aliens could look like, it could be something as small as like a bacteria. I really got into like microbiology recently, and like it's an alien world that exists right here, right now, on the surfaces of everything.
Right.
And like that world looks so alien. Like
Yeah.
what if it just looks like a giant microbe, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't know. But it's cool to play around with it. And like again, I'm not opposed to humanoid looking aliens and amphibious aliens and aliens modeled after animal species that we know and relate and have like a touchstone to like tell stories through.
Yeah.
I appreciate both is ultimately what I'm trying to say.
I do think I will on that point. I do think that whatever alien might evolve in the real world again, it would have to have the ability to like build some sort of technology to be like if we were to ever encounter it or
and barring like a freak incident, like an asteroid flying by that has microbial life.
no,
on it,
I
for
mean,
example.
I'm talking like more civilization.
Yeah, if you encounter another civilization.
Yeah, if we can't, it would have to have like some, and I don't know that necessarily means it has to have like 5 digits. I'm not sure how it could evolve. Like it's probably hard to conceive it, but it would have to have like some ability to make tools.
And there are features again that like opposable thumbs are a massive boon to like, primates, right?
Yeah.
So there are some things, but it could also be limited to our own experience.
Yeah,
just with the number of possibilities out there, it could go either way, right? We don't have enough data. We have just our own reference point to go off of. I'm reminded of a show on Discovery Channel years and years ago where they talked about like hypothetical alien life, and they animated it. It was almost like Walking with Dinosaurs, but on an alien world, and they played with features like, well, what if we turn up the gravity, or what if and like they came up with some really cool, interesting, unique designs.
That is really cool.
And yeah, I can't even remember what it's called, but it's definitely worth any of our listeners remember giving us a shout out and reminding me what that show is called, because I'd love to watch it again. And it's worth watching for all our listeners.
Also, have you seen Arrival?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even like displacement of time. Yeah.
But the alien depicted in Arrival is like obvious. It's very alien, and to me that's like, it's not realistic because we don't know what an alien would look like. But it does seem to be something that would be so different from us. It's not humanoid.
And
it
even plays with interdimensional, like
Yeah.
temporal space,
Yeah.
and like, can we interact with other species if they come from another dimension, right?
Right.
So you can get crazy. You can get real crazy with
Yeah.
this. Like I said, you could have beings of pure energy, that
Right. Yeah.
are gods to us because we can't fathom it.
In fact, there's even going back to Stargate here, because I did watch the whole Stargate, every single show years ago.
I'm surprised we're actually not talking more about Stargate
Yeah.
right now.
But one of the first episodes in Stargate SG-1, I remember it being in the first season, but there's actually like an intelligent rock life form of some kind, which is kind of interesting, an interesting idea to explore, So there's all sorts of things that you could like hypothetically go beyond, just the humanoid thing. But also, I loved Arrival myself, and I also loved the short story it's based off of, The Story of Your Life. It's called The Story of Your Life, and it's like 40 pages. It's pretty short, but it's I recommend everyone read it. It's just like a very beautiful, deep story.
It plays with big concepts.
Exactly. But it's very big, but it's also very small because it deals with like the death of a child, right?
That's fundamentally what it's about.
It's good. It's cool in that way, but I highly recommend everybody check that out. Christian, do you have any theories about the Rakata plague?
Personally,
yeah. Like what wiped them out? Because this is one thing that's actually pretty vague in a lot of the literature. There isn't a whole lot written about it, and it seems to suggest that it was pretty quick.
And it's crazy because you do encounter some Rakatans in KOTOR, and they like speak like a babbling language, and they're very like it doesn't even seem like their language survived. Right? They're so detached from what they used to be.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it was some form of COVID. That's my working theory.
Yeah. It definitely seems like it's hard to say. I want to assume, though it's never said anywhere, so this is just an assumption. I want to assume that it also physically killed them. Because their population is so much smaller. By the time you get to Knights of the Old Republic, they're barely a species. They are, in fact, actually not just on Lehon. There's a couple other worlds that they're still on, but they're in a similar situation where they're not spacefaring and they're pretty primitive. So it seems to me like I don't know how it could have been so destructive if it didn't actually kill them, but I could just be assumed maybe they were so dependent on the Force technology stuff.
I mean, I liked it. A cool idea would be what if we just destroyed our technology in one shot today? Solar flare carrying event wipes out all our technology. What would we look like? Would we turn into Stone Age people again? Right? Would we, not know, I don't know how to build a computer.
Yeah. How long would it take even with all the knowledge that we had in our heads, how long would it take
to rebuild?
And all of that knowledge is now on computers, right? So if you had a solar flare, some sort of major EMP event that wiped out all the electronics on Earth, and you'd be starting from square one in a lot of ways.
Communication is so integral, all these things you'd not have access to, right? The wealth of human knowledge on computers, and because everything is so digitized now, you'd have to. And
a lot of that might be in books, but it'd be so much slower to
process all that information and look for what you're looking for. Yeah, well, it goes on, right?
Yeah.
It's a really cool thought experiment to play with in possible reality.
Yeah,
but a terrifying possible reality. But yeah, I would think that alone could be bad enough. To topple an empire, right? Especially in intergalactic. What happens when you can't communicate to your home? Right? Your reinforcements. You're surrounded by a slave species.
Your life support systems on your spaceships, right?
Yeah, shut down. Everyone in space dead in one shot, right?
You're just you're completely hooped. It seems like whatever happened, it was very, very fast. You
have kind of two empire decline stories. You have the slow degeneration, one thing after another, and then finally they just kind of fade into history. But they had kind of the slow decline, And others are just like very catastrophic, instantaneous. Like they were here once, Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah,
then
Bronze
they're
Age
gone,
collapse.
right?
Yeah, it's like comparing the Bronze Age collapse to like the Roman, the fall of the Roman Empire, right? Which is very slow, and the Bronze Age.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is very,
rapid
yeah,
and
yeah.
like, well, we don't know, but
Yeah.
presumably from all our estimates, yeah, the Bronze Age collapse would have been fairly rapid.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's it is just I think it's kind of interesting. Who knows what actually happened. Last little tidbit on this episode is that there's actually some rather strange depictions of the Rakata in some Disney properties. And I am glad that Disney hasn't retconned the Rakata, because I thought they might, but
yeah,
they haven't retconned it yet. And but they haven't made any new material about it, except for there's this one comic book where it's supposed to be Mon Calamari, and I looked at this comic frame, and it is 100% a Rakata, and I recommend everyone go look it up. Just look up Rakata Mon Calamari, and I don't know what it. A lot of people speculate as to why this illustrator drew this, but it's unclear. Maybe he was like trying to lay a little Easter egg or something for people. But he hasn't said anything about it, and a lot of people found it very strange.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, did you hear something?
I think I did.
Oh boy. Okay, we got to get out of here.
Oh boy.